This video is about bias and stereotypes. Let's start with stereotypes. A stereotype is an assumption or belief, usually a negative assumption or belief, that applies to a specific group of people. It lumps people together on the basis of a single characteristic, for example, height, race, or gender, and implies that every person in that group is more or less the same. Consider, for instance, the idea that every woman wants to have children. We are lumping a whole bunch of very different people together on the basis of a single characteristic, gender, and assuming that they are all same in the way that they want to raise children, which, needless to say, is not true. Bias then refers to the tendency to prefer one person or thing to another and then favor that person or thing, behaving unfairly. Biases are often informed by stereotypes. So consider, for example, stereotypes about criminality. These stereotypes often suggest that racialized people, especially racialized men, are more likely to engage in criminal activity. You might have absorbed these stereotypes growing up and as a result end up favoring white people in some settings, acting unfairly on their behalf. For instance, acting as if your racialized colleagues were less trustworthy than your white colleagues. This is not always a conscious decision. A lot of our biases are unconscious, and yes, we have biases, it's human nature. So while conscious biases are obvious and intentional, unconscious biases are subtle and unintentional. We are not conscious of them. That is, we are unaware of the fact that we are being biased. It's important to note, though, that being unaware of your biases does not make them okay. Unconscious biases are just as harmful as conscious biases. In fact, they are often more harmful than conscious biases because we are unaware of the harm we are committing. How can we repair harm that we are not aware of? It's important to note that there are different types of biases. It is hard to say how many exactly. Some say there are 5 or 10 types of bias, while others say there are 200. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to talk about 3. Affinity bias, confirmation bias, and anchoring bias. Affinity bias is when we favor people who are similar to us. Maybe they practice the same religion or share our love for hockey. Or maybe they went to the same high school or grew up in the same city or town. Regardless of what it is you have in common, affinity bias makes us think highly of these people, favoring them and above the people we have less in common with. If I were to hire someone who went to the same school as me, even though the other candidate who went to a different school is more experienced, I would be an example of affinity bias. Confirmation bias is when we only notice or accept information that confirms our existing thoughts or beliefs. For example, if I were reviewing a resume and after noticing that the person who wrote this resume went to the same school as me, I only absorbed certain parts of their resume. That is, I ignored other parts of their resume without really meaning to, confirming my belief that people who attended this school are smart and capable. Anchoring bias is the tendency to rely on the first piece of information we receive, ignoring or not fully considering information that comes later. If, for example, I were reviewing the resume of somebody who went to the same school as me, and this is the first piece of information I take in, where they went to school, I might not place as much importance on what follows. If I take the fact that they went to the same school as me to be a good thing, I might conclude, without really realizing it, that this resume is a good resume, regardless of what the rest of it says. If you want to learn more about different kinds of biases, check out the PDF that's included in this lesson. It includes some great resources to expand your learning. Bias comes into play whenever we have to make a decision. And the reality is that we make decisions all the time. This includes conscious decisions, for example, when applicants get an interview and which do not, which employees get raises and which do not. But it also includes unconscious decisions. For example, how we interact with different colleagues. Who do we joke around with most of the time? Who do we agree with most of the time? Whose opinions do we seek out most of the time? Bias is sneaky. That is why it's important that we take the time to understand how it really works. This includes taking the time to reflect on our own biases. So the PDF in this lesson is actually a great place to start. It includes a ton of questions for self-reflection. But first, let's talk a little bit about the 3 Jedi Hub lenses: disability, indigeneity, and racialized newcomer status. There are stereotypes around all 3 of these groups. Stereotypes that portray them as subpar employees. Persons with disabilities are stereotyped as less capable or less intelligent than non-disabled persons. Indigenous persons are stereotyped as lazy or less hardworking than people who are not Indigenous. And racialized newcomers are stereotyped as less educated than people who grew up in Canada. And although these stereotypes are not real, that is, they're not based in facts, they still affect persons with disabilities, Indigenous persons, and racialized newcomers in very real ways, making it unnecessarily hard to find work and to succeed in the modern workplace. These stereotypes are based on systems like racism, white supremacy, colonization, capitalism, ethnocentrism, and ableism, systems of oppression. We are going to talk more about oppression in an upcoming lesson. This brings us to the end of lesson 1. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.